I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good one. Good for grounding. I'm recording already.
Perfect. We entered the time portal, baby, where it just time is
Yeah.
illusory, it doesn't exist.
Welcome to Openly Spoken, the podcast to help you show up, speak out, and be seen within your relationships, your work, and most importantly, with the relationship with yourself. In this podcast, we talk about all things self-love, relationships, sexuality, spirituality, and more. Hi, I'm your host, Celia Antonio, and I'm a women's sexuality and self-love coach, a mindfulness expert, and your cheerleader for your most grounded and expansive self-expression. You can connect with me on Instagram at selfexpressedbabe, and for all of my guest episodes, there will always be links in the show notes so that you can find them online. I give my deepest thanks to you for being here and spending your precious time with me today. Now let's begin our journey. All right, we are recording. Welcome back, or welcome to Openly Spoken if it's your first time here. My name is Celia. I will be your host today, and I'm so excited to introduce to you today's guest, Jannine MacKinnon. Jannine is a holistic women's empowerment coach, and she helps moms ditch societal conditioning, embrace their inner power, and create the life that they love. Through helping hundreds of moms, interviewing over 50 experts, leading conversations within her community, and from her own personal growth, she knows that self-love and self-leadership are at the core of true transformation. By blending modern science with ancient spiritual teachings, Jannine helps clients ditch the exhausting hamster wheel of family life within the matrix to create a life they're obsessed with, one that truly aligns with and supports their inner essence and values. So beautiful. Welcome, Jannine. Thank you for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. I would be curious to know anything that is like alive on your heart today to bring into our conversation. I know that we wanted to talk about using sexuality as a source of empowerment. So whether it's from that topic or just anything else that feels alive for you to speak into the space, I would love to know.
All right. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here today and to chat with you. It's been great connecting with you and bits and pieces throughout our program. And a huge part of that program feeds right into the topic with sexual empowerment for personal empowerment. I've had quite a journey over the last few years, I'd say. I had been, by the time I was 30, like I never really masturbated that much. I was a sexual person, definitely promiscuous in my younger days, but it was always like for someone else. Like there wasn't much personal side to it. And so that's something I really connected with around the time I hit 30. Excuse me, just gonna grab some water real quick.
Yeah, I'm gonna hydrate too.
Yeah, I know we each have that kind of like fall little voice something's there.
Yeah.
But after having my two kids, throughout that process, I really felt like my body wasn't mine. And it tied into kind of sexuality being for someone else. And so I forget exactly what spurred it. I think I had a partnership with Vush as a content creator and was having more and more conversations around sexuality with my community. And so that's when I kind of started my self-pleasure journey. And so self-pleasure can just be a great way of building that connection with yourself, building confidence, learning what you like, what you don't like, learning how to communicate that with your partner, being able to create this relationship with yourself, making pleasure for you and kind of having ownership of that. And then it was later through our program with Vita that it really opened this whole new world of where you can incorporate really these rituals, these practices to create this relationship on a deeper level. I love what Layla said at the beginning of the program, that a tantric principle is the biggest transformation comes through the taboo.
Oh,
And
yes. I forgot about that one.
that resonates so deeply with me. And I think it's, as it relates to sexuality, so many of us hold shame, embarrassment, disgust, and negativity for sexuality, whether that's different experiences we've had, our relationship to our genitals and different body parts, and different things like that. And our sexuality is this innate part of us. Like, that's literally how we create other humans. We all know that sex sells, and that's because there's this primal sexual part of us. And so when we associate all these feelings of shame and disgust and embarrassment around this innate part of us, it really holds us back in fully being
Yeah.
ourselves. And that's why I think sexual liberation is just such an important part of our personal empowerment, of being aligned with us, being accepting of the full multifacets of us.
Yes, so true. And I think so many women can relate with your story, including myself, of feeling like your body is for someone else, and living a sexual life where it's like you're not connecting with yourself, but you're there for your partner, and like your body is for them. And I can only imagine how motherhood will kind of like change that perspective even more, of like, my body is again serving somebody else. What a spiritual awakening that sounds like. And I think that's why it's so liberating when we can take that power back of, my body is not for somebody else. My body is mine first and foremost, both within, I would say, both within the realms of sexuality and maybe even in motherhood, because when we can take better care of our bodies, we can take better care of our children and our families, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I love that you bring in this piece of I think the words were liberation comes from embracing the taboo. Were those the words?
That wasn't quite how I put it, but I like how you said it that way. What I remembered Layla saying was the greatest transformation comes
Transformation.
through the taboo.
Yeah. Yeah. With me, transformation and liberation are like, I feel like transformation is a combination of both being liberated and thriving, maybe. What do you think? How would you define transformation?
Yeah, I like how you put that. For me, transformation is that change, that metamorphosis. And there can be different facets to it. And for me, liberation is almost like the celebration of something and like letting the
Mm,
shackles go from it, like liberating from your emotions, allowing yourself to move through the hold they have on you. Similar with like sexual liberation, it's where how it aligns with you rather than the
yeah.
programming we've received.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. And another piece of your story that I think is very relatable, both for myself and for a lot of women, is like not having that space for self pleasure and masturbation. I feel like in our societies, it's more, I guess, talked about amongst men and more like widely accepted that, like, oh yeah, of course men masturbate. And with women, it's either like shamed, or I feel like we're kind of like taught to be scared of our own bodies. Was that your experience? Because that was my experience.
Yeah, I feel like it's just so well known throughout our culture. I guess a lot through entertainment and things like that, that like guys
Mm-hmm.
masturbate. Like there's all the jokes of like the socks and like having lotion nearby and just all these
Yeah, there's
different
even
things.
like American Pie, you know, that movie
Yeah.
series. Like that whole concept is like a boy having sex with a pie.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's so male dominated, and
Yeah.
there's fun put around it. Like it's very accepted,
Yeah.
that it's just a part of growing up as a boy. This is what happens. But I think it's very much not talked about on the female side. And
Hmm.
so, because of that, there can again be like shame around it, like there's secrecy, which makes it feel wrong,
Yeah.
because oh, people don't talk about it, so like oh, maybe I'll try this in private, and it feels wrong. There's this sense of I'm doing something wrong associated with it,
Hmm.
and there's just, I believe that our yonis, our womb spaces, like it's a portal of creation. It is powerful. Like we can literally birth life from one plane into another, and that's explored. And when we can begin to masturbate and self pleasure, like it really builds that relationship with ourselves and our power.
Hmm.
And you had touched on, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but with females, it's almost like, oh, it's don't go there with your power. We kind of stuff that down. We don't want you
Yeah.
to be able to do that. And I think that's reflected throughout so much of history. And with
Yeah.
the spreading of Christianity and different organized religions, is very much
Hmm.
like that's wrong. Don't do that. And I think, as I touched on through getting to know ourselves in that way, that's how we can really embrace our own inner power. Our sexual energies are life force energy. The more we can learn to be in tune with that and use it in different ways, the more we're able to really be our aligned selves.
Yeah. I love that. I also have experienced that our yonis and our womb space definitely are a source of creation. And I would love to know how maybe like a pivotal moment for you of how you went from where you were before of like not being someone who practices self pleasure to being someone who views connecting with your yoni and your body in a sexual pleasure way. I don't know if I worded that grammatically correct, but I'd love to know like what that pivotal point was for you that kind of like shifted that perspective.
That is a great question. I'm not sure if there's been a pivotal point. I think it's so much of this journey for me,
Yeah.
that's kind of ongoing, building on top of each other. But I do remember, I'd say it went along with kind of few months of my personal self pleasure journey, and that's when I started to kind of reclaim dressing the way I like. Fashion's always been something I've
Mm,
loved. I played with fashion throughout my whole life. And then with becoming a mom, just survival mode with those early years, that's something that kind of went to the wayside.
mm-hmm.
So it seemed to re-spark again along with the self-pleasure journey. And I think it ties into that creative energy, because that's a way that I really
Yeah.
am creative
I
and I
love that.
embrace in my day-to-day. I
Mm-hmm.
think of getting ready now as an embodiment practice. I choose who I want to be. I might want to tap into different things like that. So I do remember, I want to say it's just shortly after my youngest turned 2. Um, and so with self pleasure and just really making that switch into how I care for myself, how I get ready, and have that creative piece that goes along with it. And another thing that comes to mind as I'm kind of recounting that journey is through doing different healing work, that's often quite attached with the self pleasure practices and the ritual space. I began to have different creative pieces of me really start to shine more again. So I was very creative as a young girl, just like beading all different things, making clothes, stuff like that. And again, that kind
Mm-hmm.
of fizzled and died out throughout my teens and early 20s. I
Mm.
think perhaps some of that was different sexual traumas and things like that, which kind of brought that creative force down,
Yeah.
to be out of touch with it. And so throughout that self pleasure journey, my creativity has really just blossomed again. Like throughout this past year, I've been making these beautiful sun catchers that we have throughout our house, like creating these nice little spaces, different like plant lattices, like super random things, but it's just fun ways that I enjoy making things and having that creative energy flow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as someone who is human, I was going to say as someone who is a woman, but like the whole concept of like what is a woman is like something that I'm questioning both from being in the program that we're in and from a podcast conversation I had yesterday. But I think as a human, it's so important to have that space where we're creating with our hands. And it's so grounding, it's so meditative, and you're in this space where there's not really judgment or planning. You're just kind of like surrendered to the experience. And I feel like that has so many parallels when it comes to sexuality. Like we have to be, not have to, we benefit from being able to be surrendered and being able to just feel safe enough to go with the moment. So I would love to know your experience with surrender and safety, because I feel like those are big pieces when it comes to even having the possibility to self pleasure, let alone go connect with someone else sexually in a way that is empowering, where you're not giving your body to them just to please them, where you are in your power as you connect with them. So I would love to know your experience with surrender and safety. What comes up?
Yeah, that's such a big piece to all of this, right?
Yeah.
And I think I was able to connect with kind of personal surrendering fairly easily. I do have a lot of trust for myself. But there's quite the shift with learning how to surrender in partnered situations with my husband.
Mm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's kind of plays into what we touched on with really reclaiming our body for us and not
Mm-hmm.
just in service for someone else. And so being able to reclaim that and learn how to surrender into them is a journey. And so, like I touched on with self pleasuring, we learn what we like, how to communicate that. And so, going through that with our partners, it can be a little bit messy and uncomfortable going through
Yeah.
that journey when we're kind of switching from just kind of letting whatever happen to being more empowered, asking for what we want. But through that, that's where you start to tap into more pleasure. And you're able to trust the process more and build that surrendering. Another piece for me, and it kind of touches a bit on what you said,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like a masculine feminine energy dynamic there as well. And I used to be quite in my masculine energy. And so that's like very go, 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 very action oriented, control. So for me, I found it hard to surrender because I had this mental stuff going on that could be very masculine energy. And especially as a mom, it was hard for me to like take off the mom hat and go
Mm.
into the sexuality hat because
Yeah.
there'd be a lot going on in my mind. So I think it was learning to tap into sensations, oh,
Yes.
to help me get out of my head and the different like, oh wait, I need to do this, I need to do that, whatever it might be, or the self-consciousness with the body. That's another piece too, is really building that acceptance for your body. I used to have, my husband would put his hand on my tummy and I would immediately just go like ick, and like the
Yeah.
negative associations with the tummy. So healing that is a whole component. Tap into sensations was so helpful for creating that sense of surrendering. And then the more we would play around with it, I found the easier it became to surrender. Because say I would be making dinner, one of my favorite things my husband does is come up behind me, put his arms around me, and then I can feel his like stubble on my neck. And that's just one of my favorite things. And that I used to have so much resistance to it when I was like more caught up in my head. I might like freeze up and not like that as much.
Yeah.
But as I've been able to tune into those sensations, like the hands and the
Yeah.
stubble, that's where I can just begin to surrender. And so I think that can be so helpful for people that struggle in that area, is really focusing on the sensations while also having trust for yourself and your partner, that you can communicate what feels good for you, communicate what doesn't feel good. And that really brings that sense of safety.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
It is very magical how opening up to different sensations, whether that's what you smell, what you feel on your skin, what you hear, like anything, no matter how subtle it is, with all of your senses. Really, it's crazy how much pleasure that opens up for simple things like feeling your partner's stubble on your neck, and how before tapping into that, like that might have made, like you mentioned, that's something like you weren't open to, or it could even be like ticklish or something. Like that was my experience. Like I was way more ticklish. And I'm also curious to know, like, as you started your journey to tap into sensations and what you were feeling in your body, did you ever come across like trying to voice out loud what you were feeling in your body and not feeling anything? And if yes, how did you navigate that?
Are you speaking to like numbness and
Yeah.
not feeling anything?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that wasn't as much of a thing
Okay.
for me.
You're a lucky one.
Yes, I am a lucky one. Yeah, that personally, I didn't experience numbness too much. But one thing that comes to mind that is going off track, but on the ticklish part,
Okay.
that I'd
Yeah.
love to share, is I used to be, well, I have been quite a ticklish person. But one thing that came through learning about cycle tracking was a game changer in the bedroom when it came
Okay.
to this. So through cycle tracking, I learned that I'm more ticklish leading up to my period. So before
Interesting.
knowing this information, I would get ticklish when certain things would be done, and it would become this frustration point, because it's like, okay, this was fine before, this turned you on, this like had things rev up, but now it's a shutdown, like what's going on? This is so annoying. Like it was this piece of contention between the two of us. But through cycle tracking, I actually learned that about myself, and that it lines up with my cycle and then sometimes with different stress levels. And so having that understanding and being able to communicate it with my partner, now that ticklish thing isn't so much of a thing. It doesn't become personalized, that it's either like my fault or his fault. It's just this understanding of how my body works. And so we know to kind of go into different things. So I know that's not related to your question at all, but it just came to mind on the ticklish point. Was so helpful.
Yeah, I love that though. I love that you brought that in. I think it's totally like in line with our conversation, because really at the end of the day, like getting to a place of empowerment through your sexuality is really a learning experience about your body, and how you can communicate with other people, like with your partner or partners. And I love that, like what you've been bringing up and what you brought up just now with communicating, when you are ticklish in your cycle and how it's become, like you said, that the situation won't become personalized. And I think as we have brought up in this conversation about like speaking your needs with another partner, I think one of the things that can hold people back is when we speak our needs, there can be sometimes this like fear or holding ourselves back because our partner might take it personally, and then instead of it creating, this great connection that we're wanting to create, it creates a fight, and then it's like and it could be very frustrating. So I'd love to know how you, like, if you've come across that, maybe for yourself or maybe even, with your work with your clients, and how you would navigate that.
Yeah, that is a huge piece. Those uncomfortable conversations that eventually, through practice, you learn to navigate a little bit more smoothly over time.
You gotta be willing to mess it up a few times.
Yeah, you do. You really do. And I think often, this doesn't necessarily apply to all men, but often men want to be fixers. All right, they can be doers and fixers, and so our choice of words can make a big impact when we're saying something that's not working for us. If they see it as kind of their fault, that they're not able to fix this thing, that can cause more reactions because they generally really do want to support us. Now, I don't have as much familiar with female-female conversations. There may be some of this dynamic or perhaps not, but that's just my experience in my relationship and some other women I've worked with. And so there's different ways of navigating the conversation that can be quite helpful. And I find it really explaining what's going on for us in a way that's not you're doing something wrong, and giving a roadmap for success. Because often, again, speaking more to those heterosexual relationships, men, when they know what to do, have that instruction manual, they're great. They want to please us, right? And so if we can say things like, say, using the ticklish as an example, just realize through a few months, every time I'm ticklish, it's like a few days before my period. So it's not even like on either of us. I just happen to be ticklish leading up to this point. So next time things are starting to heat up and I'm feeling that way, I want you to know, like, it's not your fault. It's not the circumstances, but I still want to do these things with you. Do you think we could try this instead? And really giving that roadmap for success, I find, can be so helpful. There can be other kind of things that are helpful for having those conversations that I've learned along the way, and speaking with some different psychologists and things like that, is having like low pressure conversations. Rather than like the sit down, face each other, eye contact, talking about the shit, like it can be a bit more uncomfortable, and so we're on edge, and that fight or flight can kick in a little bit easier compared to if you're walking like side by side, a little bit less eye contact, or maybe even driving. It can be a little bit more casual, a little bit easier to touch on these kind of subjects, and as you're going, you're moving your body, so again, that kind of reactionary piece that comes up can move through a little bit more when you're walking and doing activities. So that can be quite helpful as well. I've definitely found for myself and some different women that I've worked with, kind of bringing these more casually to like the walk to the mailbox tends to go better than like later in the evening after dinner, for moms after the kids go to bed, sit down and talk about it. Like it can make it become a bigger thing than it needs to be when we take that approach to it.
Yeah, making it like a casual, no big deal type of thing. And like we've mentioned with like taboos and sexuality being a big taboo, I think that's also a thread of like, we need to make sexuality something that we can talk about like it's a no big deal, casual thing, like collectively across society. Because like you mentioned, it is how we make humans. It is how we're all made. I often wonder about like if the very thing that is the reason why we're born is labeled as this wrong, shameful thing, how is that really affecting us at a deep level? And how is that affecting our, expression, our liberation, our, ability to like embrace our power and all of those things? Yeah, interesting things to think about.
Absolutely. And that's what's so great about having conversations like this on podcasts, listening to different podcasts, being able to hear about different people's experiences and perspectives. And they can be a great jumping off point for us in having other conversations as well. It's like, oh, I heard this thing. What do you think about it? And again, it kind of eases the pressure a little bit. It like brings in this third party rather than just the one-on-one.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned earlier about harnessing sexuality or like sexual energy to use it in, I think what you said, I don't know if it was word for word, but you were talking about like once we harness and connect with our sexual energy, we can use it in all these different ways. And you did make a connection between sexuality and creativity when you talked about how like your sense of fashion was a place that you played in as a kid, and then that kind of like went down as your sexual experiences weren't so positive, and then as you started connecting with self-pleasure and sexual energy in a more positive and helpful way, that creative side of you that loves to play with fashion came alive again. So there's been that connection with creativity. I'd love to know when you say that we can use sexual energy with all these different things. What are some of those things?
So a few different things come to mind on that. I think one piece is just working with our sacral chakra. And as we kind of clear blockages with that, build that energy in that relationship, our creative energy just starts to flow. That's just a piece of it because they are one and the same, like create life, create other things. So that's a piece of it. And then another piece that you can play with in so many different ways too is that sexual energy. When you're feeling a little bit horny or frisky or whatever it might be, you can channel that in different ways. So yes, you can channel it into sexual experiences. Or one thing I've played with that has been great is using that friskiness into like work projects or other projects, energy that's really starting to flow. And I find the most like aligned things come out of that. Like I've built up sales copy and thing like that around launches with really tapping into that energy. It's a fun thing to play around with. And then there's also kind of sexual energy transmission, and sex magic can be a whole other thing that's fun to play around with. That really brings that sexual energy flowing throughout all the chakras in the universe, bringing it back down and using that to manifest, pairing that with our vision of what we're wanting, and then taking that action along with it. So there's a lot of different ways we can really play with our sexual energy in terms of how we create.
Yeah. Is the sex magic and manifestation piece, is that something you would like to maybe explain for people listening as a practice they can try? Or is there something else that you would like to kind of offer up as a kind of like starting point for anyone who's listening to this conversation and is like, ooh, I want to tap into this. I want to use my sexual energy for my sales copy or for my work projects or whatever it is. Is there anything you'd like to share around that?
Sure. So I'm a huge manifestation girl. And then through this program, like learning more and more about sex magic is just like, oh, the cherry on top for me. And so I have a great quantum manifestation meditation available on my site if people are interested in checking that out, because there's kind of two real pieces to this. So most importantly, on the manifestation side, we really want to hold that vision of what we're manifesting, bringing in those five senses, the see, feel, touch, hear, taste, and like really making it real. So in that meditation I have, like I take you through a portal, look at yourself in the mirror, like what do you look like? What do you see in your life around you? What does that really feel? And just bring those senses real within your body, because when we can make it real in our mind, we can make it real in the world around us. Yeah. There's actual studies and stats around athletes who take the time to imagine the game ahead of them and scoring and going through the whole game. They perform better. And they often see those results. Yeah, so it is scientifically proven. So that's a piece. Now, as you bring that into sex magic, you're bringing in pleasure, you're building that sexual energy.
Maybe we should explain what sex magic is in case some people don't know what it is.
Yes. Okay. So basically, a simple form of sex magic is just saying that you're using your sexual energy to manifest. So that's kind of like simple out there. It's not some like black magic stuff going on.
It's witchcraft. Well, maybe it's witchcraft. But...
Yeah, maybe it kind of is. But there's no like dark energies at play unless someone were to take it that way. I'm sure they could, but like that's not what I talk about and teach. Yeah. But it's basically pairing manifestation principles with sexual energy. And so the idea behind it is building that sexual energy through all of the chakras while holding on to that manifestation vision and that full senses, and then shooting it out into the universe, really building that relationship with the universe, and then pulling that down into your body, really how you feel as though you have this manifestation. And then another piece is actually going and taking the action. We can do sex magic all we want and really feel like it, and we will attract things into our life that way, but it's very important to also take the aligned action to create that change as well.
Yeah. I feel like manifestation and like how the chakras are related to the kind of like journey of an idea becoming a real thing could be a whole second podcast episode, because I'm like feeling myself wanting to go there, because it is very fascinating of like how, you know, our crown chakra, it's like thoughts, and then like we go to the third eye and it's intuition, like eventually we're, you know, speaking out what we want to create, and then when we're at the heart space, we're like looking at, you know, how can we collaborate, and it just keeps going until it's like a real thing. And I love that you bring in the piece of first visualizing before going into the sex magic, because you need to hold that vision. And not only that, you also talked about the action, because I feel like that's where a lot of people will kind of stop. They'll be like, you know, just imagine it and that's all, and it'll just happen. And like we do need to take actions that are like aligned with the vision that we want. And it is also very important, and I think like sometimes we don't always get the space to actually sit and visualize what it is that we want, because we're so busy, and like sometimes we'll be taking actions all day that we don't realize are manifesting our life, that we haven't intentionally sat down and thought about. So then it's manifesting this life that we don't actually want with every fiber of our being. Like there's this wanting for more sometimes. Yeah, that could be a whole conversation.
Yeah, it really could be its whole episode in itself. But I love what you touched on is like often we can take so many actions that don't necessarily line up. And I think it's the difference of being reactionary with our life, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
reacting to what comes up. And so I've got this opportunity, okay, I go for it. And just really taking those steps. Things happen, you can really step back and be intentional. Really
Yeah.
sit down and think about what you want and then intentionally choose how to build on that, is really what puts you on that path of alignment and an aligned life. And it's also how you can uncover different blockages,
Mm-hmm.
because that's this whole other advanced stage to all of it, which we go through in our program. But when we're able to see those resistances that are popping up, we're able to deal with them, heal from them, learn from them, and continue on that path compared to having them within our system and not necessarily being aware and continuing to react and then not understand
Yeah.
why we're like wishing for this thing, trying to manifest this thing, yet internally our subconscious knows that it feels like we don't want these things because of this result we may get that's anticipating.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to slow down, to
Yeah.
be intentional with it, to be able to uncover those pieces and really manifesting that reality.
Mm-hmm. So beautiful.
Yeah.
I would love to bring in, there are some questions that I ask every guest, and I would love to bring those in. And, but maybe before, one of the questions that I know I wanted to ask you, because this was kind of like a shift in perspective for me as I tapped into self pleasure and sexuality work. I'm curious to know like, what your perspective of like what sexuality even is. What is that? And like, how did you come to that? Like, do you remember, like, I feel like that is in a sense a spiritual awakening of sorts where you see and hold sexuality from a different perspective and you're like, wait, whoa, this is what it is. I'd love to know if you have any thoughts on either sharing what that perspective is that you currently hold as of the time of this recording, because I know things like this can always evolve. Um, yeah, anything around those
Yeah.
realms.
Yeah. I think sexuality has this whole spectrum. And so often we're brought up kind of thinking things perhaps on this end of the spectrum of it's like for someone else, it's them getting off, us perhaps getting off, because there is that orgasm gap often. And say we are, it's that like short repairing after fights can be this whole other thing associated with it, but it's really that like brief connection and short burst of pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
on one end of the spectrum. And sexuality is just this whole beautiful range that we get to experience. It's being able to be in touch with pleasure and sensuality, which doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. That's like another piece of it, is as
Mm-hmm.
you, I find as we do this work, we can find that sensuality and pleasure in the most beautifully simple things. Like one kind of aha moment on that for me through doing this work was being at um, a walk with my family on this like spit at the ocean, and I'm noticing the way the wind is like swaying the grass and the trees along it, and it was like this incredibly pleasurable, beautiful experience, just like tapping into that. And
I
so
love that.
sexuality brings us that, which is amazing
Yeah.
and incredible. and allows us to be more present in just the beautiful everyday moments we have. And then further along the spectrum is just that like energetic, sacred, spiritual side that we can unlock and uncover, that sacred energy exchange that we are doing with a partner and partnered experiences, and really having that energy flow. And when you're able to tap into it, it is so expansive. And really, like for me in certain experiences, and it's not like it always is, but it really is tapping into the divine, tapping into another portal of how our energy is. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
And you can take from those like short bursts, little orgasms and bursts of pleasure, to really this sense of expansiveness as we learn to drop into surrender. One thing I've been working with recently is really that expansiveness, and bringing in breath work and sounding has been really helpful for me, and taking those orgasms from that short burst to, some people can be like multiple minutes, if not hours. I'm certainly not there yet. But lengthening it for a few minutes and just being in this state of divine pleasure, this immense energy that really flows through you and connects you with the universe. It's so beautiful and incredible. So yeah, that's a whole range, but that's kind of my thoughts and feelings on sexuality right now.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And for anyone watching or listening, like I would also urge you to take the time and space to contemplate, what does sexuality mean for you? Because I feel like we don't get the space to think about what that means for us. We're kind of just told what it is for us, which is why I love that you presented it as this spectrum, because usually it is taught to us that it's, this monogamous heterosexual relationship is the only way. And we also mentioned earlier about like slowing down and surrendering. And we mentioned how like there's more space in societies usually where we talk about how like men self-pleasure, but like not the women. And bringing that back to this piece of it being a spectrum, I think sometimes female sexuality is kind of looked at through this lens of male sexuality. And because of that, there isn't space given typically to like really slow down and take our time, because as women, we don't have penises that are just like suddenly erect and ready. Like we need that time to open up and to slow down. And I don't think that is talked about enough. It's not common knowledge enough, because we're looking at sexuality usually, as a whole through this limited lens rather than this spectrum. So I love that you shared that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because that is such an important piece too, is our sexuality and our turn on is so different, individual to individual, and there can be quite the polarity between masculine and feminine, although there's definitely overlaps in how they can be rare and ready to go on seemingly a drop of a hat. And for us, we really do need that time. And that comes with that communication piece. Like a big thing for me is like, clit and nipple should be one of the last things you go for. If you go to that first, I'm going to shut down. Like you got to go outside in, like work those edges and go in. And that needs to be normalized. I think there's an expectation put on women that we're just supposed to match that raring to go, happen, bang, come at the same time, and that's it. But there's really so much more to it than that. And I also want to add that when we allow that space for slowing down, for really building that sexual energy, that pleasure within ourselves, not only is it so much better for us and more pleasurable, it is for our partners as well.
Yeah.
Like, I really think, again, we have that portal as females, as uterus owners. And there's, again, more people than just females with uterus owners. But we have that portal. And when we're able to make our sexual experiences align with the way that we work in our bodies, it creates that expansiveness for all the people involved.
I love that. So beautiful. I could keep talking to you.
Yeah, I know, right? We'll have to come back for another one at another point.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I usually ask everyone is, what does self-love mean to you?
Self-love for me is self-acceptance. And yeah, it really comes down to self-acceptance and supporting yourself. Those for me are the key of self-love, because we can be so negative towards ourselves. And that's where that acceptance piece comes in, accepting our quirks, our shadows, that terrible thing we said or did, being able to have more acceptance and compassion for ourselves, is really at the core of self-love for me.
That's beautiful. I love it. And then what makes you feel the most grounded?
Nature. I live on Vancouver Island in BC.
Oh, jealous.
I am at the ocean multiple times a week and out in nature. I'm in a small town. Yeah, nature, water, the trees. I'm a barefoot bandit. I say I'm barefoot from about March to October.
I love that.
Or sandals if I'm like out and about. But in my backyard, like I'm wearing bare feet all the time, and that's just so grounding. And being able to be in nature, that's definitely my favorite way of grounding.
That sounds like a delicious life.
Yeah, I think so.
And then what is your favorite part about being human?
Experience, emotions, the full range of it, and just all the different experiences we get to have and the way we feel throughout those and learn from those and grow and connect with other people. That connection, I think, is a beautiful piece of our human nature. We really are community-based beings. I'd say experiencing the full range of emotions and the way we can connect with others is amazing about being human.
And what about with being a woman? What's your favorite part about being a woman?
Question. The way we uniquely lead ourselves and those around us, I think is just this amazing part of being a woman. There's this extra piece of compassion or empathy, the intuition piece kind of goes into that connection for me. And so, the way we do things different, community-based, and have that empathy and connection for others, and our creativity and our portals, our sexual energy, all of those pieces.
Yeah. And for everyone who tuned in, who is curious to know more about you and to connect with you, where can they find you?
My website's unapologeticmotherhood.com. That's where you can find some of those meditations I touched on. And to really connect with me, I'd say Instagram is my platform of choice. So at Jannine.MacKinnon. I also play around with TikTok and Pinterest, and getting back into consistency with my newsletter as well. So there's lots of options there, but I'd love to connect with anyone who's listening on Instagram. Shoot me a DM, say hi, let's chat.
Yeah, beautiful.